Before Lucifer fell, before demons were born, before heaven had an order, there was hell. But not the hell you were taught about, not the lake of fire, not the place of punishment, not the kingdom of rebellion. No. Tonight, you will hear something different, something forbidden, something the church buried in silence for more than 1,000 years, a truth older than scripture, older than angels, older than God's first words, "Let there be light." Because before there was light, there was a place where light could not enter, a place older than time, older than creation, older than reality, a place the most ancient texts call the hells before hell. And if what these texts say is true, then the hell we fear today is the youngest, safest, weakest version of the underworld, a cage made by God not to punish demons, but to protect creation from what existed long before demons were even imagined. Tonight, you will learn what came before the fall, before Adam, before Eden, before the angels. A story so ancient that even darkness has forgotten it. But those who preserved it, the mystics, the desert fathers, the exorcists, the forbidden scholars, they left warnings. Warnings that the church erased. Warnings that said, do not speak of the first hells. Do not call them by name. Do not open the memory of what sleeps beneath the world. Tonight, we open all of them. Welcome to the dark side of religion. This is the truth about the 9 hells that existed before hell. Get ready. This episode is not theology, not mythology, not legend. This episode is danger. Asterisk. There is a belief older than Christianity, older than Judaism, older than even the first cities of humanity, a belief that the underworld was not something that began with sin, or rebellion, or punishment, but a structure that always existed. Like gravity, like time, like the void, something not created, but discovered. The first mystics, those who wandered deserts long before the Bible was assembled, spoke of an underworld divided into realms, realms that predated creation and continued after it, realms that heaven did not rule, realms that God did not design, realms that angels feared. They called these realms the proto-hells, or, in a translation preserved only in fragments, Os Infernos antes do Inferno. And the idea behind them is terrifying. Hell was not the punishment for evil. Hell was the containment of something older. The universe, according to these ancient sources, was built with walls, not to keep humans out, but to keep something else in, something that lived before creation, something that does not understand existence, something that does not belong anywhere. Light has touched. The first of these realms was described simply as the hell of silence. Not flames, not screams, not torment. Silence. Silence so complete that sound itself died inside it. Silence so profound that even God's voice could not reach it fully. Silence so old that creation had to be built away from it. Mystics wrote, before God created light, he created distance. For silence must never touch the living. This hell was not empty. It was inhabited, but the beings inside were not demons. Demons require rebellion, and rebellion requires angels, and angels require creation. No. These beings were something else. Things without form, things without will, things without morality. They were described as echos q respirum, breathing echoes, creatures that reacted to the approach of light the way a shadow reacts to fire, by contorting, twisting, fleeing, searching for the darkness that birthed them. When God spoke the universe into existence, the texts say these creatures recoiled. Not in pain, not in fear, but in confusion. Creation was the intruder. Light was the anomaly. Existence was the disturbance. And when God sealed this first hell behind a barrier of light, something happened, something terrible. Some of the creatures did not make it back. A few were caught between realms, half inside the old hell, half inside the forming universe. These became what ancient mystics called the tattered ones, beings that flicker between existence and non-existence, creatures that do not belong anywhere, shadows that move without movement, presences that have no shape, no desire, no thought, only reaction. And the mystics warned, they remain here. They do not belong. They will never belong. But this was only the first hell. Asterisk, asterisk. The second was far worse. It was called the hell of unbeing. O Inferno de Nausea. Here, the ancient texts claim nothing existed, not even nothingness. It was described as a realm where identity collapsed, where the concept of self dissolved, where even God's awareness did not fully reach. The mystics said, in that hell, even angels ceased to be angels, which means this realm was not a punishment. It was a risk, a threat, a place so fundamentally incompatible with existence that anything that entered it would cease not only physically, but metaphysically. This hell predated demons, predated rebellion, predated Lucifer. In fact, one forbidden text makes a shocking claim. Lucifer feared the second hell. Not even pride could survive there. But why would an angel know of a realm that existed before creation? Because, according to these forgotten writings, the angels were not the first beings God confronted. He had seen the hells. He had sealed them. He had built creation as protection, and Lucifer's rebellion was merely the repetition of a conflict far older, not the first fall, just the first fall inside. Creation. The true first fall happened long before, and it happened in the third hell. It was known as the hell without God. This name confused scholars for centuries. How can a place be without God if God created everything? But the mystics insisted this hell was not created. It was found. When God extended his being across the void to form reality, he discovered places he could not enter. Places where his presence had no meaning. Places where he was not recognized as creator. Places where existence did not respond to his authority. These were not realms of evil. Evil is rebellion. Rebellion is choice. Choice is creation. These realms were something else. Worlds without God, not because they rejected him, but because they never knew him. And inside them lived entities unlike anything in Scripture. Not angels, not demons, not spirits, not souls. Something separate, something parallel, something indifferent. The mystics warned, if such beings enter creation, they will not obey our laws. Not heaven, not hell, not life, not death. And one day, something slipped through, a presence the early church fathers destroyed all records of. A being that wandered creation without understanding it. A creature that did not tempt, did not speak, did not act, only observed. The desert fathers called it the Pale Watcher. Not evil, not good, just incompatible. Those who saw it said, seemed confused by human form. As if trying to understand why we exist, the church erased every mention. Because if such a creature existed, then God was not alone when he created reality. But again, this was only the third hell. The fourth hell was called the hell of the first rebellion. Not Lucifer's rebellion. A rebellion far older. A rebellion that did not involve angels, but pre-angelic entities. The mystics describe them as proto-spirits. Forms without form. Wills without identity. Intentions without consciousness. Asterisk, asterisk. Some of these entities resisted the order God was imposing on the void, not out of pride, not out of hatred, simply because they were incompatible with structure. They were like static resisting music, darkness resisting shape, chaos resisting meaning. God sealed them in the fourth hell. The mystics said, their rebellion continues, for they do not know they were sealed. Time had no meaning in their realm. So to them, the rebellion never ended. The fifth hell, the most dangerous, The hell beneath creation, where the mystics believed God imprisoned something older than angels, older than demons, older than life, a being they called the first hunger. They said, it devours without consuming. It grows without feeding. Not evil, not alive, not dead. Just hunger. Solomon's forbidden texts mention it. So do fragments from the Nag Hammadi library. So do oral traditions from ancient Middle Eastern mystics. The creature beneath creation was not meant to escape. But some exorcists claim that what we call demonic possession is not rebellion, but proximity. Humans, being fragile creatures of flesh and consciousness, sometimes brush against the first hunger, and it reacts, not intentionally, not maliciously, like fire reacting to oxygen. The church banned all mentions. Because if humans can be affected by something older than hell, what does that mean for salvation? But we continue. The sixth hell was described as the hell before time, a place where existence unfolded without chronology, where causes and effects dissolved, where beings could suffer without ever beginning or ending their suffering. One text warns, an angel who enters that realm will scream forever and never begin screaming. This hell, the mystics believed, was the closest thing to pure chaos. Not evil, not torment, just the absolute breakdown of order. ***. The seventh hell was perhaps the strangest, the hell that watches us. They believed certain entities, sealed long before creation, could still observe reality through cracks, not interact, not intervene, not possess it. Watch as creation unfolds. Watch as humans struggle. Watch as heaven and hell wage wars. Quiet observers, silent witnesses, forgotten watchers. The eighth hell was the most forbidden, the hell God did not create, a realm that simply existed, a realm older than reality itself, a realm so alien that even describing it was considered heresy. The mystics believed God discovered this realm and sealed it away out of necessity, not out of fear, but out of protection, for what lived there was not meant for existence. And then, finally, the ninth hell. The one even demons fear, the one even angels refuse to speak of, the one erased from every canonical scripture. They called it the hell of the first darkness, the birthplace of all opposition. Not evil, not rebellion, not intention. Simply darkness that became aware. Ancient mystics believed Lucifer encountered this realm, not physically, but in a vision. And what he saw changed him forever. Not pride, not jealousy, but knowledge. Knowledge of what came before, knowledge of what lies beneath, knowledge of what God sealed away. Lucifer fell not because he wanted to be God, but because he realized God was not the first. Not the only. Not the beginning. And that knowledge, that unbearable truth, drove him into rebellion, not to dethrone God, but to escape the fate of creation, to be ignorant, to be blind, to be protected. He chose rebellion over ignorance, choice over safety, fall over obedience, because he glimpsed the hells before hell. And realized that creation is only a prison with prettier walls. And now, here you are, listening, learning, opening doors that were meant to remain sealed. But the mystics warned, to know the first hells is to be seen by what sleeps within them. And now that you know, you must ask yourself, who is watching you back? If the Inferno described by medieval Christianity was engineered to control, terrify, and convert, then what exactly was erased? What stories were so dangerous, so unmanageable, that the church chose silence instead of explanation? Because buried beneath cathedrals, sealed behind monastery walls, and locked within Vatican vaults are accounts of the underworld that have nothing to do with fire, demons, or eternal torture. Accounts not of punishment, but of process, of transformation, of realms that shift depending on who enters. realms where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur like fog crossing an ancient river. One such account is known only as the Redacted Descent, a parchment so old the ink has petrified into the fibers. Scholars claim it was copied from a now-lost Aramaic scroll sometime around the 4th century, during a period of violent doctrinal purges. What makes the Redacted Descent terrifying is not what it says, but what is missing. Entire sections scored out, words dissolved with acid, whole paragraphs burned to ash, leaving only charred shadows where sentences once lived, but the fragments that survive tell a story no preacher dares to speak aloud. It begins the moment after death, not a tunnel of light, not angels, not judgment, but sound, a low, rolling hum like 1,000 voices whispering underwater. The text claims this sound is the first gate, the border between the world of breath and the world of shadow. Only those who cross it hear the truth. Every soul descends. The righteous do not ascend first, they go down. This single line contradicts 1,000 years of doctrine, but it aligns with something older, far older than Christianity. The belief that every soul must pass through a liminal underworld before reaching its final destination. The Sumerians believed it. The Greeks believed it. The Hebrews of the Second Temple period believed it. And according to these forbidden writings, early Christians believed it too, but why was it erased? The next surviving section reveals the reason. It speaks of a realm where souls do not burn, but remember. A place where the deepest truth of a person is peeled open, exposed like bone beneath broken skin. The parchment calls it the mirror field, a barren plain made of a substance that looks like glass, but moves like water. Every step forces the soul to relive the moments it tried to bury. Not as punishment, but as purification. This idea was dangerous because it eliminated fear. And without fear, institutions lose power. Another fragment describes a horror far more disturbing than fire or demons. A figure known only as the archivist, a being who keeps the memories of the dead cataloged in a library with no walls, where books are not written but grown. The archivist is neither angel nor demon, not a judge, not an enemy. The text describes it as the one who remembers when the living forget. This contradicts the simple heaven versus hell narrative imposed during later centuries. It presents the afterlife as a complex system, ordered, intentional, almost bureaucratic. And above all, dynamic, because the next erased section, reconstructed from handwritten copies hidden by desert monks, makes a claim so explosive the church labeled it the most dangerous heresy ever written. It states that hell is not eternal, that every soul eventually returns, and that the underworld is not a prison but a cycle, one that even angels cannot escape. The parchment says, even the first light walked these halls, and even he trembled. Who is the first light? A mistranslation of Christ? A reference to a pre-Christian figure? Or something far older, something erased? The next segment offers clues. It describes a colossal gate made of no earthly material, smooth, metallic, alive. Carved into it is a symbol older than any alphabet, a spiral breaking into fragments. The monks called it the fractured eye. It appears not only in the Redacted Descent, but also in forbidden Gnostic codices, in early Ethiopian manuscripts, in pagan carvings predating Rome. The symbol means the light that fell. Not Lucifer specifically, not one being, but a phenomenon. The idea that anything capable of illuminating truth is also capable of collapsing under its own gravity. Knowledge itself becomes dangerous when it grows too heavy to hold. And this is where Part 2 begins to shift into darker territory, because the text describes creatures that roam the lower realms, not demons created to torture the wicked, but echoes of human emotion, shadows formed from unresolved trauma, figures shaped by guilt, fear, desire. In this cosmology, Hell does not torment you, you torment yourself, manifesting the beings that pursue you. The parchment mentions 3 by name. The hollowed, beings shaped like human silhouettes, but empty, collapsing inward. They arise from unspoken regrets. The maulings, creatures whose faces are nothing but mouths. Screaming words the soul refused to confess. The weepers, tall, veiled entities whose tears burn through the ground. Created by unresolved grief, these are not demons. They are the consequences of a life unlived. The church could never teach this. Because if hell is something we create within ourselves, a reflection instead of a punishment, then fear loses its teeth. Control slips. And so the narrative was weaponized, simplified, industrialized into the version we know: fire, torment, eternal damnation. But the surviving fragments reveal the truth behind the fire. Imagery. Fire was never meant to represent punishment. It represented clarification. A burning away of illusion. Hell, in its oldest form, was not a place of torture, it was a forge. A place where souls were remade. One erased line barely legible. Damaged by acid reads, "The fire does not consume. It reveals." This line is the most dangerous idea ever removed from Scripture, because a hell that reveals instead of destroys is a hell that empowers. And that brings us to the most forbidden section, a passage that suggests the underworld is not merely a destination. It is a dimensional layer that overlaps the living world. Thin places called threshold fractures appear in times of grief, war, mass death, overwhelming despair. Early Christians believed these fractures were moments when the boundary between the living and the dead thinned enough for visions, spectral beings, and supernatural encounters to emerge. This aligns with paranormal reports from multiple cultures. Across 2,000 years, shadow figures in hospitals, apparitions on battlefields, unexplained voices near gravesites. The text claims, "When the living suffer unbearably, the gate whispers." This was absolutely unacceptable to church leaders, because it suggested hellish visions were not demonic deception, but truth bleeding through. And if hell bleeds into the world, then the living are never entirely safe. The final surviving paragraph of Part 2 contains a warning so powerful that medieval scribes tried to burn it off the parchment. But the outline of the words remained, and scholars reconstructed them using wavelength imaging. It says, "One day the gate will open, not for the dead, but for the living. And when it does, the world will meet the shadow it has always feared." Hell, once described only through symbols and shadows, becomes far more unsettling when examined not as a distant realm of punishment, but as a mirror held up to the soul, a place that reflects everything we refuse to confront. Across ancient cultures, the concept of hell was never meant to be a simple furnace of fire. It was a landscape shaped by the human condition, a geography carved by guilt, fear, unconfessed truth. Early theologians from both East and West hinted at something disturbing, that hell begins long before death. It exists wherever a person is consumed by hatred, isolation, or the slow corrosion of meaning. The flames were metaphors, they argued. The real torment is remembering who you were meant to be and realizing what you became instead. But in hidden manuscripts, forbidden commentaries buried beneath centuries of edits and purges, a darker possibility emerges. Some ancient mystics insisted that hell was not just the absence of God, but the presence of something else, something that watches, something that waits. They described an intelligence moving through the cracks of human despair, feeding on silence, thriving in the moments when a person stops believing they can be redeemed. One fragment, attributed to a censored monastic order, claims that the worst suffering of the damned is not the fire, but the voice that speaks in the fire. A voice that sounds like your own, accusing you of every secret failure, replaying every moment you could have chosen differently. And yet, there is an equally haunting reflection hidden beneath this horror. What if hell is not a sentence, but a consequence? What if every lie, every cruelty, every selfish choice shapes a kind of architecture around the soul, brick by brick, until the structure becomes a prison? In this vision, demons aren't guards, they are echoes. They are the projection of everything we refuse to surrender. They wear our faces. They speak our fears. Some medieval mystics describe demons as fractured souls, splintered pieces of human nature that broke away and took form. Shadows cast by hearts too wounded to heal, too proud to kneel. But there are older stories still. Stories that whisper that hell is a battlefield, not a tomb. That the struggle between angels and demons continues not in the heavens, but in the human spirit. That every choice, every moment of compassion, every act of cruelty feeds one side or the other. And if that is true, then hell is not the final destination. It is the front line. A place where the weight of humanity's unresolved darkness presses against the gates of eternity. In this view, hell is not a question of whether you end up there, but whether you carry it with you. Whether you let it shape you until you cannot recognize the difference between the chains you fear and the ones you forged yourself. The thought is unsettling that a person can live surrounded by comfort, by success, by company, and still be walking through their own private hell, silent, unseen, burning from within. And perhaps the most terrifying reflection of all is this, that the escape does not come from running, but from facing the very thing you fear most. Because if hell is built from the parts of ourselves we try to bury, then salvation begins the moment we dare to dig them up. And so the question becomes not what hell is, but what it reveals. Not where it is located, but what it awakens. Not who is condemned to it, but who unknowingly walks with it every day. Somewhere in the intersection of myth, theology, and human psychology lies a truth more frightening than fire, that hell is not a destination but a revelation, and the moment you look into it, it looks back. Some ancient texts go even further, suggesting that hell is not merely a place of suffering, but a kind of memory that refuses to die. They describe it as the moment when all illusions fall away and the soul sees itself with unbearable clarity. In that instant, every lie told to others and to oneself collapses like rotten wood, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered truth. This truth, they say, is the fire. Not flames that burn the skin, but realization that burns the spirit. And for some, this realization is liberation. For others, it is torment without end. The early desert hermits, those silent wanderers who sought God in the wastelands, wrote of nights when their minds filled with visions of a realm beneath the world, a realm where souls wandered in circles, not because chains held them, but because they no longer remembered how to walk forward. One hermit confesses in a banned manuscript that the greatest pain he witnessed in those visions was not screams, but the silence of those who had forgotten their own names. In that silence, he claimed, demons learned to speak, but their voices were thin, quiet, insistent, like thoughts that do not belong to you but still echo inside your skull. The terrifying idea is that hell might be a place where identity dissolves, where you cannot run because you no longer remember running, cannot pray because you no longer remember hope, cannot cry because you no longer remember loss. In that emptiness, a person becomes something hollow, an echo of who they were meant to be. And some mystics believed that this hollowing is not inflicted by God, but by the human soul itself when it refuses transformation. That the path to hell is paved not by sins committed in passion, but by truths avoided in fear. But perhaps the most unsettling interpretation comes from Jewish mysticism, where Hell Gehinnom is described not as eternal, but as a refining fire, a place where everything false is burned away until the soul can finally remember who it is. In this view, the pain is not punishment, but purification. And if that is true, then the flames we fear are the very fires that could save us. Yet another tradition argues that some souls cling so tightly to their darkness that even purification becomes agony. Not because the fire is cruel, but because letting go feels like dying. Then there are the forbidden theologians, the ones whose writings were locked away or destroyed, who suggested that hell is not a place God sends you, but a place you choose when you cling to anything more fiercely than you cling to truth. Pride, anger, envy, greed, these are not merely sins, but architects. They build rooms around the soul, walls thicker each time we choose ourselves at the expense of others. And after years of such choices, a person may discover that they have walled themselves in so completely that not even light can enter. The chilling question then becomes, if hell is something we build, brick by brick, with every refusal to confront our own darkness, then how many of us are already living inside structures we do not recognize? How many walk through life with a smile, a job, a family, yet feel an unexplained weight pressing on their chest at night? A heaviness with no name, no face, no source? Some call it anxiety. Some call it despair. But the old texts have a different word, shadow. A piece of the soul that has turned away from the light, waiting to be acknowledged before it consumes the rest. And what if the demons we fear are really the shadows we abandoned? What if the torments of hell are the voices we ignored until they grew loud enough to shatter us? In that case, hell becomes a kind of dialogue, a confrontation with everything we tried to escape. A reckoning. And in the black depths of that reckoning, a frightening possibility emerges that the soul is far more powerful than we ever imagined, capable of creating both the light that saves it and the abyss that devours it. The ancient writers end with a warning, whispered like a prophecy: the gates of hell never close. Not because they trap the damned, but because they wait for those who dare to walk back out. Asterisk in the end. The most frightening truth about hell is not that it waits for us, it's that it may already live within us, quietly shaping our choices, whispering through our fears, growing in the dark corners we refuse to examine. And maybe that is why the old mystics warned that the journey into the abyss is not a descent, but a revelation. Because when you finally face the darkness inside you, you realize something terrifying and liberating at the same time. The gates of hell were never meant to imprison you. They were meant to show you who you really are.